Welcome to the deep dive. We take complex source material and really try to boil it down to the essentials you need fast. Today, we're tackling, well, a pretty tough area in pharmacology, antiviral drugs.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. And a big reason why is that a virus isn't, a standard cell. It's essentially genetic material that takes over your own cells to replicate.
That's really the crux of it, isn't it? The drug has to get inside our own cells to stop the virus, and doing that without damaging the host cell. That's incredibly difficult pharmacology.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to quickly synthesize the key points from the chapter materials, the main drug classes, how they work, those toxicities, and importantly, the nursing considerations.
Okay, let's start with the basic terms, just to be clear. We have antiviral drugs. That's the broad category for things like herpes, flu, hepatitis viruses.
Right. And then there's a specific subset, antiretroviral drugs. These are specifically for retroviruses, and the main one everyone thinks of is HIV, human immunodeficiency virus.
Before we get into the drugs themselves, maybe a quick reminder about our own defenses. The immune system is our primary weapon, but these drugs step in when it's overwhelmed. You've got cell-mediated immunity T cells, more general response, and then humoral immunity.
Exactly. Humoral immunity involves B lymphocytes, which produce those very specific antibodies, or immunoglobulins, tailored to the antigen. Ultimately, these drugs are trying to knock the viral load down low enough so the patient's own immune system can actually get back in the fight.
Okay, great context. Let's dive into part one, the non-HIV antivirals. The source material walks through the 6 stages of viral replication: attachment or fusion, uncoating, taking control, making new parts, assembly, and then release.
And the key takeaway here for most common antivirals is where they intervene. They usually either mess with the virus making its nucleic acids, DNA, or RNA during that production stage, or some of the newer ones actually block that very first step, the attachment and fusion to the cell.
Got it. So let's start with a really common target, herpes viruses, and that includes VZV, varicella-zoster, so HSV1 for oral herpes, HSV2 genital, and VZV causing chickenpox and shingles. The go-to drug here is usually acyclovir, brand name Zovirax.
Right. Acyclovir is first line for both initial episodes and recurrences. It's what we call a synthetic nucleoside analog. Basically, it looks like a building block the virus needs.
Yeah.
It gets incorporated into the viral DNA or RNA chain and stops it from getting any longer, effectively jamming up the replication process.
Okay, here's a practical point from the text pharmacokinetics. Acyclovir often needs dosing, like 5 times a day, which can be tough for patients, but its prodrug, valacyclovir, gets absorbed much better orally. So less frequent dosing. That can really help with adherence, right? And maybe even better pain relief for shingles.
Exactly. Better bioavailability means simpler dosing, which patients generally prefer. And yes, potentially better control of zoster pain. But for VZV, shingles especially, the timing is crucial. You really need to start treatment within 72 hours of the rash appearing to get the best effect. And always remember to emphasize, these drugs suppress the virus, they don't cure it, the virus stays in the body.
Good point. Okay, moving on to influenza. Another case where timing is absolutely everything. We're talking about neuraminidase inhibitors here, mostly oseltamivir, Tamiflu, and zanamivir, which is for Lenza.
Yes, and the mechanism is quite neat. Viruses, after they replicate inside the cell, need this enzyme, neuraminidase, to basically cut themselves free from the cell surface so they can spread. These drugs inhibit, they block that enzyme. So the newly formed viruses get stuck. They can't escape the infected cell.
But that window, it's incredibly short. The source's stress treatment has to start within 48 hours, just 2 days of symptoms starting. After that,
the benefit really drops off significantly. The virus has already spread too much. And just a historical side note, older drugs like amantadine, rimantadine, they only worked against influenza A, and the CDC doesn't recommend them anymore due to resistance and limited effectiveness.
Right, good to know. Okay, next up, hepatitis. Particularly hep C, HCV, which is a huge reason for liver transplants. This area has seen some massive changes, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely revolutionary changes. The big breakthrough was sofosbuvir, brand name Sovaldi. It's an RNA polymerase inhibitor, first in its class. And the huge deal was that it could often be used without interferon, which had notoriously difficult side effects. It's usually used with ribavirin, although now there are even newer combos like Harvoni, which is sofosbuvir plus ledipasvir, that don't even need ribavirin.
But the thing that jumps out immediately is the cost. The sources mentioned figures up to, what, $100,000 per patient? That's staggering.
It is staggering. But here's the perspective shift the text offers. You're not paying for decades of managing a chronic, often debilitating disease anymore. You're paying for a short course, often just 8 or 12 weeks, of a curative regimen. It fundamentally changes the economic and, more importantly, the human outcome. It's a cure versus lifelong management.
That context helps understand the price tag, even if access remains an issue. Now, safety. If ribavirin is used, what's the absolute must-know warning?
Pregnancy, category X, full stop. Ribavirin has significant teratogenic potential, meaning it can cause severe birth defects. So it's contraindicated not just in pregnant women, but also in their male partners. Both partners need to use effective contraception during treatment and for months after. And another key point for healthcare workers: if you're pregnant, you absolutely must avoid handling or administering the aerosolized form because of inhalation risk. That's critical.
Extremely important. Okay, rounding out the non-HIV section. CMV, cytomegalovirus, often treated with ganciclovir.
Yes, ganciclovir is another synthetic nucleoside analog. And it brings up a really important concept: dose-limiting toxicity. For ganciclovir, the major issue is bone marrow suppression. It can cause dangerous drops in blood cell counts. But if you can't use ganciclovir, the alternatives like sofosbuvir or zidovudine, their major dose-limiting toxicity is renal toxicity, kidney damage.
So that choice depends entirely on the patient's situation, right? If they've had a bone marrow transplant, ganciclovir is probably too risky. But if they're, say, a heart transplant patient on cyclosporine, which is already tough on the kidneys, then foscarnet could push them into renal failure.
Precisely. It's a clinical balancing act based on the patient's specific risks and comorbidities.
All right, let's shift gears now to what's often seen as the most complex area: HIV, AIDS, and the strategy we call HAART highly active antiretroviral therapy.
Okay, so HIV is a retrovirus. Its genetic material is RNA, not DNA. And its replication hinges on 3 key enzymes that become drug targets. First, reverse transcriptase. This enzyme takes the viral RNA and makes a DNA copy. Second, integrase. This enzyme takes that new viral DNA and literally integrates it, inserts it into the host cell's own DNA.
And the third one?
That's protease. After the host cell machinery makes long strands of viral proteins, protease acts like scissors. It cuts these strands into the individual functional proteins needed to build new, mature virus particles.
Now, HIV mutates rapidly, which leads to drug resistance. That's why the standard approach isn't just one drug, right? It's HAART.
Exactly. That rapid mutation, especially by the error-prone reverse transcriptase enzyme, is the core problem. So HAART involves using at least 3 different drugs from different classes, often combined into a single pill now. This attacks the virus at multiple points in its life cycle simultaneously, making it much harder for resistant strains to emerge.
That makes sense. But if hitting it from multiple angles was the key, why did it take a while for this multi-drug approach to become standard? Were the early drugs just too toxic?
That's a huge part of it. The very first antiretrovirals had severe toxicities. Combining them often meant multiplying those dangers. It really took years of research to find combinations and dosages that were potent enough to suppress the virus long-term, but also tolerable enough for patients to actually take every day for life.
Okay, so the strategy uses drugs from several classes: reverse transcriptase inhibitors, RTIs, protease inhibitors, PIs, fusion inhibitors, CCR5 antagonists, and integrase inhibitors.
Correct. And the goal across the board is to get the patient's viral load, the amount of HIV in the blood, down to undetectable levels, usually defined as less than 50 copies per milliliter. Achieving this dramatically improves immune function, prolongs life, and reduces the risk of those opportunistic infections that define AIDS.
We should also mention prevention here: pre-AP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, drugs like Truvada.
Yes, pre-OT is highly effective, potentially reducing transmission risk by 90% or more in high-risk individuals. But its success absolutely depends on adherence taking the pill consistently every day.
And another major success story is preventing mother-to-child transmission.
A massive success. Giving antiretroviral therapy to HIV-positive mothers during pregnancy and delivery, and to the newborn briefly after birth, has drastically cut infant infection rates, sometimes by 2/3 or even more. It's a huge public health win.
Okay, let's talk side effects, because HAART isn't easy. The protease inhibitors especially have some, well, very visible and unusual issues.
They certainly do. One of the most distinct is lipodystrophy. This is a bizarre redistribution of body fat. Patients might develop fat accumulation, like a buffalo hump on the back of the neck, while losing fat in the face, arms, and legs, leading to a kind of gaunt, skeletonized appearance. PIs also carry metabolic risks, problems with lipids like high triglycerides, and insulin resistance that can look like type 2 diabetes.
Wow, that lipodystrophy. That's not just a medical side effect. It's physically altering someone's appearance in a very noticeable way. That must have a huge psychological impact. affecting adherence too.
Absolutely. It's a constant, visible reminder of the illness and the treatment, which can be incredibly distressing and definitely impacts quality of life and willingness to stick with therapy. Compare that to, say, zidovudine, or AZT, one of the earliest RTIs. Its major dose-limiting toxicity is severe bone marrow suppression, anemia, neutropenia, serious issues, often requiring a change in regimen.
And a very specific practical point for the protease inhibitor indinavir?
Kidney stones. Nephrolithiasis is a significant risk. Patients taking Indivir absolutely must be counseled to drink plenty of fluids. The text specifies at least 48 ounces, that's about 1.5 liters, every day to help flush the kidneys and prevent stone formation.
Okay, this leads us perfectly into part 3, the nursing process and patient safety. Given how complex these drugs and regimens are, this seems absolutely critical.
It really is. Before even starting therapy, you need thorough baseline assessments. Vital signs, weight, energy level, yes, but critically, liver function tests and renal function, BUN, creatinine, estimated GFR. You need that baseline to know if the drugs are causing problems later.
And sometimes even genetic testing is needed beforehand.
Yes, specifically for acyclovir. Patients need to be tested for the HLA-B5701 allele. If they have this gene variant, they're at very high risk for a potentially life-threatening hypersensitivity reaction, so the drug is contraindicated. You also always need to check for drug interactions, especially with drugs that affect the CYP3A4 liver enzyme system, as many antiretrovirals are metabolized this way. Strong inhibitors or inducers can dangerously raise or lower drug levels.
Okay, moving to implementation, actually giving them the drugs.
Yeah.
What are some key safety points?
Well, basic infection control for topicals. If you're applying something like acyclovir cream, always wear gloves or a finger cot. Prevents you from accidentally inoculating yourself. Standard precautions always apply.
The chapter also highlights look-alike, sound-alike drugs. A classic example they give is Zostrix versus Zovirax.
Right, Zostrix is capsaicin cream, used for pain relief, often arthritis or nerve pain. Zovirax is acyclovir for herpes infections. Totally different uses, similar names. It underscores the nurse's responsibility to always do the rights of medication administration, right drug, right patient, right dose, right route, right time, and right indication. Verify what it's actually for.
Good example. What about 5E administration, say, for acyclovir?
Slow infusion is key. 5E acyclovir needs to be given over at least 1 hour, not pushed quickly, and ensure the patient is well hydrated before, during, and after the infusion. This helps prevent the drug from crystallizing in the kidneys, which can cause acute renal injury.
And for the oral antiretrovirals, the HAART drugs, adherence is paramount, but it's not just taking them daily, is it? It's about timing.
Absolutely. They must be taken at evenly spaced intervals around the clock. Missing doses or taking them irregularly allows the virus to replicate, increasing the risk of mutations and drug resistance. Maintaining steady blood levels is crucial.
And there are nuances even with food, right?
Yes. For instance, Indivir absorption is significantly reduced by high-fat, high-protein meals, so it's best taken on an empty stomach or with a light, low-fat snack. Zidovudine, on the other hand, can be taken with or without food. And sometimes there are practical tips, like the text mentions mixing the liquid form of ritonavir, which has an awful taste, with chocolate milk or a nutritional supplement to make it more palatable.
Okay, so finally, patient teaching. What are the absolute critical takeaways patients need to know?
They need to know which specific side effects warrant an immediate call to their provider. Things like a new rash, especially with blisters or fever, could be a serious hypersensitivity reaction. Also, signs of liver problems like jaundice, yellowing skinnies, persistent nausea, vomiting, dark urine, or signs of kidney issues like decreased urine output, or respiratory symptoms like wheezing. They need clear instructions on red flags.
And reinforcing the long-term nature of this.
Definitely. Emphasize that treatment is usually lifelong. Adherence is non-negotiable for success. Regular follow-up appointments and lab monitoring are essential. And crucially, because the drugs suppress but don't eliminate the virus, safe sex practices, including consistent condom use, are still absolutely necessary to prevent transmission.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the common antivirals like acyclovir up to the complexity of HAART for HIV. The recurring theme seems to be suppressing viral replication, managing toxicity, and supporting the patient's own immune system, rather than achieving a simple cure in most cases, except maybe for Hep C now.
That's a great summary. HAART was born out of the need to combat viral mutation through combination therapy. And the newer Hep C drugs show how targeted therapy can, in some cases, achieve a cure, albeit at high cost. The nursing process is central because you're managing potent drugs with potentially serious, sometimes visible toxicities like bone marrow suppression, renal failure, or that lipodystrophy we discussed, all while trying to ensure lifelong adherence.
Which brings us to our final thought. As treatments get better, especially for chronic viral infections like HIV, the focus shifts, doesn't it? It's not just about getting the viral load undetectable anymore. It's about doing that while minimizing the long-term toxic burden of the drugs, preserving quality of life.
Exactly. That's the ongoing challenge and the direction of future research.
Hmm.
Finding therapies that are not only potent and resistance-proof, but also kinder and gentler to the patient over the course of decades. Balancing efficacy with tolerability and long-term health, that remains the ultimate goal.